Austin Franklin, thank you so much for joining us at CityVision. This has been great. Your keynote was awesome, really inspirational. You talked about a lot about leadership principles, and that's something you know a lot about, that messages you communicate to communities. What do you think that local leaders, elected staff, just whoever's part of that hive, what kind of leadership principles do we need to be kind of espousing in our communities?
Thank you, Ben, for that question. So I think when we think about that question, we really need to look at what the research shows. Gallup Research has recently released a study called the Global Leadership Report, What Followers Want. They released this at the World Government Summit, and it's based upon 52 countries and surveys of decades of research of people and what they desire in their leaders. And they found that people desire leaders who prioritize hope, compassion, trust, and stability. So when we're thinking about those four, it's so important to circle back to the framework of the difference maker leader. One, the vision. That's really our belief, hope system. The second piece is really building that connection. That's so important. That's really our trust system. And then the third piece is the consistency piece, right? That's really our stability system. So that's what I recommend for the current leaders of this era moving forward, because the research has just released that that's what's most pivotal.
When it comes to effective decision making, I mean, decisions have consequences, and often we have to make them under pressure. What do you think is as far as technique, mind frame, stuff like that, making these good decisions under pressure? What do you think about that?
Yeah, thank you for that question, Ben. Obviously, that's something that's very relevant, decisions under pressure. And I think at first, when we have a quick decision we need to make, really want to have emotional regulation. Because oftentimes when we're leading with like an emotional reaction, emotional response, emotional decision, oftentimes that may not be the best outcome or decision for the collective group. So really want to have that emotional regulation. Remember the ABCs, right? Remember to take a deep breath. And then ultimately collect as much information as you can in that time constraint as possible. So we really want to collect. That's the first thing. And then the second, we want to be able to assess the information we collect. So for example, what if we make this decision? What are the outcomes, good or bad? And then in that moment, just let our instincts take control. When we think about sheriffs, when we think about firefighters, when we think about air control, these are people who have to make decisions under a tight time crunch. And what they do is, you don't have time if you're a firefighter, if the house is on fire, you don't have time to, let's see what we should do. You just react. So I think as mayors, as elected officials, these are unique individuals who've gone through the ranks. They have great experience, great insight. So after you've done the collect and assess, just simply react and make the proper instinct. And ultimately what should guide you is what's in the best interest of our community at large. And then just make the decision.
So because, decisions we make, elected office is sensitive. So when we have decisions, they're meant to impact the community. Not everybody's going to like it. What advice do you have as far as scrutiny and criticism and stuff like that can really make the municipal job, kind of sensitive, difficult, emotional at times? How do we kind of deal with that?
Yeah, thank you again for that question, Ben. So I think at the end of the day, when we're thinking about public scrutiny or criticism, it's kind of going back to what you just said. It boils down to a choice, a decision. That's oftentimes what individuals or communities are scrutinizing, right? Not necessarily the person, it's the choice. And I think it's so important when we're making choices to really be mindful of those decisions, right? One of the biggest kind of headline news stories when we're thinking about choices was from a guy named Nico Harris. For those who may not be familiar, Nico Harris is the GM of the Dallas Mavericks. Had a huge trade. He basically traded their star, Luka Doncic, very talented individual, for Anthony Davis, who's also a talented individual. But it's really caused an uproar in the city because Luka's like a younger, more promising talent. I'm not here to dig into what was right, what was wrong, but what I can say is he's had to up his level of security. His safety is at risk simply because of a decision, and he's received a lot of criticism. So I think at the end of the day, we really need to own, right? If it's one person that's critiquing or a couple, we can take it with a grain of salt. But if we see a collective body of people really harping on us, then we might need to reevaluate the decision we made. And I think in that moment, we really need to be transparent in terms of saying, like, what was our thought process, right? Because, Ben, this is what I believe. Vulnerability and connection is stronger than the facade of perfection. Or I'll say that again, vulnerability and connection is stronger than the facade of perfection. And if we realize we made a bad decision or not a decision that's the best, the community can respect and acknowledge, okay, hey, this elected official stood up or this mayor stood up. Hey, this was maybe not the best decision, but hey, here's what I was thinking. My place was in a good heart. I really had you in mind, but this was my thought process. And if you're transparent in that way, communities and people can appreciate that, because at the end of the day, no one's made a perfect decision all the time. But it's those moments we can own and say, hey, you know what? I could have done this. I plan to do this moving forward, and here are the adjustments. People can appreciate, and that criticism can mend the mellow out, really.
All right, so getting elected to office, you gotta have the trust of the people. Getting that to begin with, keeping it. What are your thoughts on that? Trust. You got the decision power, but people have to kind of back you up in that. How do we build trust in our communities?
Yeah, thank you. So trust is so paramount for just about any organization, but especially as municipalities and government leaders. And I like to look at trust as almost like a relationship, right? If you're thinking about somebody you don't trust, right? Friend, significant other, what is the reason? Normally they're inconsistent, they're hiding information, have kind of behavior that's questionable. But the opposite of that is consistent, it is being transparent. So I think the remedy ultimately for trust, kind of doubling down with what I just said earlier, is transparency. And so when we're transparent, what I mean is sharing as much as you can about the work you're doing and your governance, about what it's like on your plate. Because Ben, you and I spoke, I think as well as Vicky, before this event. People can assume what it's like to be in someone's shoes, right? It's like people can assume what it's like to be a professional speaper, but until you're on flights, till you're on the road, you don't really know what that's like. People can assume what it's like to be a doctor, but until you're seeing patients, you can't really know what it's like. As elected officials, we can assume as a community, this is what they're doing, this is what they're not doing, but until you're in their shoes. So I think one of the great tools is to show as much as possible that's, obviously within in alignment. Great example, my city, Jacksonville, Florida, this was about a month ago. They launched a video. They partnered with a very popular YouTuber. And he shared the behind the scenes of the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office Department. And we got to see like a glimpse. It was like an hour video. He has a huge following, and really shed light in like, what does it feel like to be an officer? Like, what is it like to, get these calls, or what are they doing for the community? And what ended up happening is like, this has gotten probably 8-9 million views to date. And you have all these people that are like, wow, Jacksonville Sheriff's Office is incredible. Like, they do so much great leadership. And I think that's what big or small town, like, what if we had a partnership with somebody who could shed light into all the work we're doing? Because I think when you talk about trust in the communities, people understanding like, wow, I didn't realize all this went behind the scenes. I didn't know they were thinking about this much stuff. Here, man, they really have our best interests at heart. It shapes and redefines the whole nature of a community. So that's what I really recommend, being as transparent as possible so the community can have the trust.
So we got to tell our story. We got to be transparent. We got to let them know what we're doing. We got to have new creative ways of letting them know what we're doing. Yeah. This is really great advice. Austin Franklin, thank you so much for joining us. Where can we learn more about you? Website, social media, anything like that?
Right. You can find me at Austin J. Franklin, social as well as website, austinjfranklin.com.